They might turn up.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah Gurich. I'm the incoming director of Grafton Regional Gallery, and it's a great joy and pleasure to be here. The traditional custodians and elders of the Bundjalung, Country, and Yaegal nations, which also encompass the land of the Clarence River and Clarence Valley. I'd like to introduce Antony Perry, who's our exhibiting artist. Before I do that, I'll say a few words. I wasn't at the opening of this exhibition and I was really disappointed. It was a long story, a finale, a farewell event in Bathurst, which is where I've come from, and then lack of air traffic controllers in Sydney so I didn't get here for the Saturday opening, but it's the perfect exhibition to land in. I'm absolutely incredibly impressed. I arrived when the install was happening for these 3 exhibitions, and I'm absolutely impressed by the calibre of the artists, the quality of the exhibitions, and the artistic and conceptual rigour that flows through all 3 of these exhibitions. So just to introduce Antony Perry is an emerging textile artist, and I think everyone here probably knows Antony, or some of us Antony.
Just about.
So he's an emerging textile artist and quilter who resides in Maclean on Yaegal Country. Mixed Signals, his debut exhibition, and congratulations for a debut solo in your regional gallery, explores the power of language, labels and identity through modern quilting. Antony's unconventional use of traditional patchwork techniques combined with his use of text, often with touches of humour, highlight how language is used to create confusion and misunderstanding. And this exhibition and what you're doing, Antony, is part of a long and really important tradition of LGBTQI artists working with textiles, quilting, embroidery to explore issues of identity that are important, and gender that are important issues that you're working with, and I'm very thrilled to open the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for taking time out of your Sunday morning and your weekend to join us here at the gallery. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the place we meet, and also acknowledge Katie Reynolds and Naomi Sands for having a real leap of faith to say, based on one little quilt that made its way into a summer exhibition 2 years ago, to say, hey, you've got a room, go. And that's actually what they said. I had 1, 2, 3 pieces completed in September last year. And they had the faith to go, well, you can fill the room, that's fine. Did I know that? No. At the time, was I panicking? Yes. And my partner David will attest to that. So I also have to thank him for the patience and the support for helping me get this show together. What have I done? I've always, I think nearly my whole life, consciously thought about language and words and the way we use them. The way we use words to define ourselves, the way we use words to speak to ourselves in our inner monologue, the way we use language to explain the world around us, the way we use language to explain the world around us to other people through our filter. So in these pieces, I came across the language that I was using in my inner monologue, and then tried to put it onto a quilt and tell a story about who I am through each of these pieces. So I'm going to try and open this up to all of you this morning rather than have me bang on for an hour. I'd much rather it be a conversation, if that's okay with you, about language, its power, how we think about other people, othering other people, bringing people into our tribe, excluding people from our tribe, and the power that language has in those ways. One of the pieces in here that I did have before I started working on the exhibition was the Yamba Road sign here. So road signs and signals like these mean a lot of things to people. So imagine coming on your family holiday. You've been in the Pacific Highway for 9 hours driving, with the lolly wrappers in the back seat and a screaming little brother. You see this sign as you turn off onto Yamba Road. These words mean more than just a place name. It means I'm starting my school holidays. I'm heading to my safe space. I can't wait for a surf. It means all those things. But these words also mean other things. Can anyone tell me what Yamba means in the Jaeger language? You might have seen it on a sign as you head into Yamba. Maggie?
Is it
Plenty of shellfish.
Yeah,
So, and Angari is noisy ocean. So that's the name of this piece, plenty of shellfish, noisy ocean. So if we start thinking about words that we're used to looking at with a certain context and applying a traditional owner's context to them, also giving the meaning of the word to the place and to those nostalgia things that those places might mean too. So that's the way I started thinking about language here. Our perception of things also changes in the language that we use. So this one over on the side here with the punctuation, what does everybody read into that? And is that more about what you see than what's actually there? There's a disconnect between the reality and your perception. So this is perception as reality. So we all choose to bring our filter to what we're looking at, to what we're reading, what we're thinking about, and the language that we use. Nobody needs to worry, it's not a race. Scott Morrison said that at the height of the COVID pandemic when we were talking about vaccines and things. That made me really cranky. So I made it into a quilt. What's the quilt made of? Well, the tartan flannelette around the sides is the pair of pyjamas that I was wearing at the time, because I was at home in my pyjamas at midday, like many of us. And it's also the pinky fabric up there. That's a bed sheet, because I retreated to bed quite a lot during the early stages of the pandemic. And the black fabric is a business suit that I'm never going to wear again, because that part of my life ended with the pandemic as well. And I've decided not to really go back there. So it's not just words that have meaning, but things that the words are built out of, and the foundations that we put under our words that also have meaning. Excuse me. Living as an out gay man or a queer person takes some audacity. We need to be bold in our choices. Taking on a label like gay or queer when you're just starting to come to terms with your sexuality in your teens is a big ask of anybody. You've always been told those words are slurs and insults, and they're thrown at you, and then you're expected to wear a badge of honour when you're barely equipped to figure out who you are. So that's why the sheer audacity quilt. Growing up as a queer kid in the Clarence Valley wasn't the easiest thing in the 70s, 80s and very early 90s. I would never have bought a Golden Gay Time, just in case somebody labelled me because I was holding the gay time. Oh boy, language is really powerful. It informs what you think about yourself, who you can be, who you can present as a person. So the Bubble-O Bill was always the second choice, honestly, because the gay time's far superior to a Bubble-O Bill. But I've created this piece. Amen. I agree. Found the t-shirt in an op shop, decided that, I can own my inner gay time now, put some sparkle on it, and let the Bubble-O Bill melt away underneath. One of the pieces that I've actually received a few messages about this week from a few different people is this one over here, one day. And this is the one that probably speaks the most to me, because one day in the future, somewhere, I won't have to explain to anyone why I'm not broken. The reality is we're all broken in different ways. We're all different. We all come from places of pain or hurt. We're easily misunderstood by people who don't have our life experiences and things. Is there a reason that we all have to justify ourselves to each other? Imagine the energy that we'd save by not having to do that moving forward in our lives. So this is my idea of utopia, is that one day we won't have to justify to each other why you're not any less by just being different. Other is okay. It's not dangerous. It's not terrifying. It's just different.
That's really interesting because it's like in a work environment kind of thing, me being an introvert, kind of thing, extroverts try to fix you all the time, kind of thing, and you kind of go, you're different from everybody else, and you get labelled as a broken person because it's just because of the personality, just because of anything. So that kind of spreads around many different aspects of life, work, relationships, family. Dominant culture always tries to fix you. I'm not broken. You don't have to try to fix me.
It makes me think of Temple Grandin, who's a lady who has autism and is an autism advocate, and her catch cry is different, not less.
It's not a universal concept, isn't it? It's a universal concept. That's a whole range of things.
Yeah.
People that have been singled out.
And I think that speaks to all of us, really. We're all singled out for a reason on some level in society. Like, we're all different from somebody else, but different, not less, is a really important concept to remember. And that quilt started out as 7 different things before it got there, as most of these do. They live a life of their own. But I've always been really into television and electronic media and things. And then it's always those funny spaces between the program where things go wrong that are the most interesting to me. The program's great, but you go, oh, they went off the air for a minute. What happened? Who flicked the wrong switch? What happened? What's going on in the background? So living in that sort of liminal space between things and understanding that it's just a different space. It's not a fault. It's not an error. It's just different. The big piece over on the side here, that's liquid television. That's the way I imagine television goes through my brain. So it's almost deconstructs the pixels off the screen and they filter through your life like a river, changing colour, fading, and then ending up in a big black mirror at the bottom like a river delta. What else? The language we use with little kids is really important. You might not think that, having a few euphemisms about the way your child's acting, how they're thinking, how they're behaving, doesn't have an effect on them. But I can remember being characterised as, he's just shy. He's a little emotional. He's very artistic. From when I was little. Code. Kids understand what that code means. They know that they're being othered for a reason. You're different from these other kids, but you don't really know why. You don't have the language yourself to explain those things. So, if you know what I mean, is my take on that. That started out as an improvisation exercise. I was just sewing bits of fabric together. sewed a few more bits of fabric together, and then went, oh, I don't really like what's going on here. Stuck it up on the wall and didn't look at it for a month. Got the rotary cutter out and started slashing holes in it. Oh, I don't know what I've done. Sew it back together, cut big holes in it, start embroidering on it, add some beads because the embroidery wasn't hanging out enough. And then just sitting with those, nice comments that people say about little kids, just wondering about the power of those and how important that is in a child's life to hear those things reinforced all the time, but without any context. Like, the kid doesn't know that you're saying emotional means they're queer as hell. Thinking about how we speak with our children is maybe something that we can do. And then the last two pieces just on the side here. The one that I know the team here at the gallery wish I'd made 15 of because we could have sold them all this week. The fairy bread. What's wrong with fairies anyway? Why is that an insult? Why is that a slur? Why is that somebody threw fairy at me for most of my youth and well into my adulthood, to be honest, as an insult? What is that? Fairy bread was the best thing at a party. So they must be pretty cool if they can make fairy bread. They're pretty awesome. So thinking about those words, like, why is that an insult and why should it be? Taking ownership of those words is something that, as queer people, we're starting to do. And queer is another one of those words that I've only really just come to terms with in the last 2 or 3 years as a label that I'm happy to give myself, because that was thrown around with venom as I grew up. And then the last little piece is just some things that were literally pinned to my pinboard, and I decided to make them into fabric. A post-it note, a fictional fortune cookie slip, and a little note to myself. What is the worst thing that can happen? It's a nice little motto to live by. So the post-it note is a recipe for the CWA scones. Along with a little nod to David. So D at Thursday 5:30, that's my little nod to David. And this fortune is intentionally left blank. It's because we all have the power to make our own fortunes. We're in charge of our future. It doesn't matter what the little slip of paper says when you finished your dinner at the Chinese. So those are the pieces. Does anybody want to share?
Can I ask a question? Did something lead you to do fibre work, or did you just go straight into it?
David's mum was the inspiration, actually. She's been a member of the Yamba Patchwork Group for about 40 years. And she would often share what she was working on when we'd visit, and we'd talk about that. And I've always been interested in textiles and fibre and things. I think since about Year 7 needlework at Grafton High, making your apron so you could do home economics. And then I would make pillow covers and curtains and bits and pieces for the house. Yeah, always been into tech drawing since high school, so lots of graphic design, those sorts of things. But COVID came along and I was bored at home and had the sewing machine and went, well, may as well give it a crack. Betty does it. I can always ask for some advice from her, and jumped off from there. And then it opens your brain up. You're not just making a quilt for a bed. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And I'm very conscious that working in this space, I stand on the shoulders of hundreds of years of history of predominantly women who have worked with textiles. And it's always been looked at as craft and less than or practical. It doesn't need to be. All those things are pieces of art from the very beginning, even if you snuggle under them. We touch fabric all day, every day. It's the fabric of our being is connected to fabric and textiles. So it's nice to work with them in a slightly different way than garment making. Any other questions?
I'm just interested in the process for you. Like, some of the work's obviously quite free flowing, and you've kind of created them as you go along. But something like the Yamba Road piece, how do you map that out? Do you use digital programs, or is it drawing? Or
Good question. Starts with a photo, me stuck on the side of the road down near the sign, just to get the scale right. I do use a computer program, so Adobe Illustrator is my best friend. This is also a pieced patchwork quilt rather than an applique piece, so it'll get a little quilty and technical. So applique, you would have a big piece of fabric and then cut out each of those letters and sew them directly on. This one is actually patchwork pieced together. So if you come and have a closer look towards the end, this 9 is almost a triangle there with another little triangle, with a little triangle, with another little triangle, with a different little triangle. There's, I think, 60 some pieces just in the number 9. So each of those are pieced separately, assembled into the word, spacing in between them, assembled as a quilt top. So the 3 components of a traditional quilt are a top and a back, which are usually fabric, and then something fluffy in between. And then it's quilted, which is the stitching that holds it all together. So the quilting on this one, for example, is actually a map of Yamba Road, sneakily hidden. So this sign sits at the Harwood Bridge, which is just here. And then you follow Yamba Road to the Angourie Road roundabout, and then that's Angourie Road down to Angourie. And it's actually to scale. We're a little bit abstract with the cane fields and things because there should be a river here, but artistic license. So it's cane fields and Angourie Road. So the quilting actually adds some extra meaning to that one rather than just the language. So Adobe Illustrator is my friend. You can't just find those templates either, so I've had to design the templates based on the actual font that Roads and Maritime use for official road signs, which is called Highway Gothic, for the font nerds out there. Highway Gothic. That's Australian standard. I'm deeply involved in Highway Gothic, and Futura is the other font that I really love as well, which is these two. Futura is a 1927-28 German font from the Bauer Font Foundry in Germany. It's pretty much the ubiquitous mid-century font. Best example in town here is Grafton Olympic Pool. The sign, it's Futura. That font is also on the plaque on the moon that Neil Armstrong laid in 1969. Most mid-century architecture will have Futura somewhere involved.
Everything's so exact, isn't it? It's just so precise in what you've done with your lettering and things like that. Very impressive.
Thank you. There's also, there's hidden stuff on this one as well, now that I'm here. So, punctuation, you choose to read what you want into it, but I have given you a hint. So I've actually quilted in lowercase Futura the actual word that should be there. So if you come up and have a look, you can see it. I'm going to do a not very gallery friendly thing and lift it up. It's mine, I own it, it's okay. So you can actually see that on the back there. So little cheats. Little story about this one. I put it in the Grafton show last year, not the last show, but the one last year. Honourable mention. Fantastic, thank you very much, Show Society. But it didn't get hung with the other quilts. It was folded up so you could only see this front corner. Because they were a little bit confronted by the content. Anybody else?
I'm interested to know how you arrived so quickly at who you are as an artist through this. I mean, if you started this during COVID, you have a very strong aesthetic and a very strong focus on language and yeah, it's...
I'm not entirely sure myself, to be honest.
Is that just naturally what you wanted, that the way that you...
I think so.
...was setting out what you were doing with
I did not set out to talk about myself at all in this work when I was asked to make pieces for this show. It just evolved. And then I spoke with Katie a little bit more about the content of the rest of the exhibitions that were going to be here, and I went, I'm just going to lean into it. I'm old enough, battle-worn enough and stubborn enough to have given up on what anybody else thinks of me anymore. And something that really resonates for me is something that RuPaul Charles says. RuPaul's a drag queen, for those who don't know. What anybody else thinks of you is none of your business. So why bother giving it the energy? So I don't care. So this is me. This is who I am. This is how I operate. And this is what I'm making, and I hope to be able to make some more. I've got some ideas.
Where do you source all the materials? They're very different, though.
They are very different. There's a lot of op shop. There's a lot of inherited fabric as well. David's mum's group are getting older, and as they retire or move away, the other ladies in the group often get first crack at somebody's stash if they're giving it away. I'll get second go because Betty's my inside dealer on the pre-loved fabric. And honestly, using fabric that has a story or has a past or somebody else has already collected is much more interesting to me than popping off to Spotlight or ordering something online that I haven't seen. I do lean towards solid colours rather than the traditional patchwork, pattern fabrics. But it doesn't mean I won't be using them in the future. I've got a bit of a stash starting to collect, and the process really informs what the product is. So the fabric leads you on a journey rather than starting out at the very beginning with a very prescriptive idea of what I'm doing and then creating it from there. So the fabric is part of the whole thing.
Gets one in colour too, fairy bread.
Oh, fairy bread. I had the idea. I was like, I have to make fairy bread, and didn't have a piece of yellow, the right colour for the butter. Because underneath those beads, there is actually a piece of yellow fabric that is the butter underneath that. So, desperate to get it out of my head and into a practical thing, I didn't want to go shopping. The food colouring came out of the back of the baking box in the top of the pantry. The turmeric came out. A yellow highlighter pen, I squeezed out some ink and dyed the fabric to get the right yellow. So necessity is the mother of all fuck-ups, some people say. So yeah, happy to make something if I need to, or squeeze some other things together to get a further piece of material. Everybody gets an Earth mark.
Any more questions? Thank you, Antony.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me well
Just
done.
wing it. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. There we go. Also, can you hear that quilt on the end? We're all of a certain age group in this room. I know you can hear that quilt.
Oh, yes.
just before the cartoon started. Sitting there waiting.
Thank you all.
The concept of it is not just